Bowman, lovely to have you with us this morning.
Hi, Chris. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's fantastic. Skip, where are you dialing in from today? You sound as though it might be far away.
Copenhagen. It's not that far away.
Okay. It's not so far. Well, actually, it's hard to get to nowadays, right? Still in the
Yes,
current
indeed.
context.
Yep.
So not so easy. So I'm really looking forward to this session, Skip.
Sure.
You know, clearly a case study. If I can say just a few words about you, your organization, Safe2Great. Also a gold sponsor of today's event. So a very warm thank you from my side with Victoria. The topic, putting growth mindset to work in your organization. We'll have some time, hopefully, for some Q&A. You yourself, strong background internationally, also an organizational psychologist, a very experienced keynote speaker, and an author, and you're currently completing your book From Safe to Great, which outlines your integrated organizational and leadership development process for implementing a growth mindset based on psychological safety in global organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to just hand over to you.
Can we just make sure that you can see my slide deck? That's my only...
Sure, yeah.
I think just before we get too far into it, you should be able to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right, I can do that.
You just need to remove the...
I think I have. There's a slight time delay. Let me just try.
That's better. Yeah, that's perfect. We can see that very clearly.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone. Unleashing change management. I always love attending this, usually face-to-face. It was amazing in Amsterdam a year or so ago, but I think this is a great virtual event keeping us together. It's super important. Safe2Great. Yeah, I want to talk about psychological safety, the connection between to growth mindset to about creating great organizations. And how do we specifically apply that to change management is really what this is about. So let me take you back in time to when I was a diving instructor in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. There's a map you can see here on that boat, Sonia, down below. It was an early morning in September, and we were diving at about 25 meters with an American colleague of mine. And we were listening to humpback whales singing, because you can hear that quite distinctly at about 20 meters down. And we're doing a drift dive. So the current is pulling us along this wall of coral, and it's very relaxing. And we were coming up to do a little safety stop at about 8 meters, and we're still drifting along quite happily. I did an okay signal to my dive buddy, and then I sort of turned back, and of course, in front of me is a fairly large shark swimming towards us at about, I don't know, it must have been about 4 meters. It was a fairly large beast. And then I turned back to see where my buddy was, and he had disappeared to the surface because I don't think he was too happy about that. So I then ascend safely to the surface and am confronted with waves, the sun low on the horizon, and he's taken his mask off and he's panicking, and we're drifting out into the ocean, which is not a good scenario. What I can also notice is that the dive master who's trying to pick us up in a boat, he is down sun of us. In other words, when he's looking to see us, he's looking into the sun. So I'm realizing that he cannot see us, right? And my buddy's panicking. So, and what I learned about diving is you can't do anything unless you establish psychological safety. That was the one thing that really was impressed upon me. And in diving, that's often a physical sense of safety, because I needed to get him to help us together swim to the coral reef, which was about 30 meters away, and stand up so we could be seen. And so that was this essential psychological safety to achieve something together that was difficult. And that is the foundation of how I approach psychological safety. And when I read Amy Edmondson's book some years later, I went, wow, I mean, what a brilliant idea. So I want you to think about psychological safety as just as much central to unleashing change management. I'm going to talk a lot more about it as we go in. So let's have a little bit more of a look at what growth mindset is, because I'm combining these two together. So most people have read Dweck's work, and when I listen to most dialogues around growth mindsets, it's essentially an intellectual capability to learn, right? It might be to risk failure, to learn from failure, etc. Apart from the fact that scientifically, failure doesn't make great learners. Success does. So in reality, I know everyone says, oh, we just need to learn how to fail. The reality of learning is that we need to set people up for success, because success tends to breed safety and confidence and then leads to more proactive action in terms of learning more. Anyway, but this is the point about growth mindset, is we look at it too individualistically. So the model that I've worked on the last couple of years, which builds on a lot of previous research into high performance, conceptualizes growth mindset as relational potential. It's how you leverage, how you mobilize, how you catalyze the resources in others. This is particularly pertinent for leaders in the sense that the vast majority of their impact is through others. So growth mindset, when we talk about are you a good learner or not, isn't that interesting. What's more interesting is, do you create learning around you? Are you a good co-learner? What I call this is the multiplier effect. I'm stealing it from a book called The Multiplier Effect. And let me give you a classic example. I know it's a bit boyish, and I know it's football, and I'm going to put some female and other kind of non-representative examples up here. I mean, Tom Brady can't be considered a representative example, but it's a good story. He is a multiple Super Bowl winner, and he joined a team this year. He's 42, which is, old for football, right? He wins lots of Super Bowls. He joins this team that's not very, moderately successful, and he takes them to the bloody Super Bowl. It's unbelievable. And the thing is, what's really interesting when you read the story is it's about his way of approaching the work. And that even people who've gone into retirement went back to join the team to play with him. And that's what growth mindset is. People are voluntarily committing to the work. So the question in reality, when we look at growth mindset or not, is, are you, from a relational perspective, are you multiplying the resources, the abilities, or are you diminishing it? And then I'm taking it from a book, which is really cool. So my point about growth mindset conceptually is that it is about thinking. I'm not saying it's not. It's about know it all to learn it all, as Satya Nadella would talk about, but it's essentially also fundamentally more powerful when we think about it as how we relate to others, right? I mean, Satya Nadella made it growth mindset central to the turnaround of Microsoft, and he has done it good. And he has a very sophisticated understanding of change and transformation. And one of his key pitches is know it all to learn it all. Now, what he doesn't recognize probably as much, but is that when you're a know-it-all, you're a smart ass. You make everyone else dumber, diminishing effect. When you're a learn-it-all, you tend to encourage learning in others. You multiply the learning of others. So that's what we're after when you define it like that. So if I've got a couple of questions for you, is to, when we think about growth mindset, think about it more relationally and think about in your life, how much of your performance depends on others for you to be successful. Think about the leaders who've been multipliers in your life. What did they do? How did they impact your performance? And who have been the diminishers? And what influence did they, how did they have that influence on you? Because this is an approach to change or talent development or leadership development, which foundationally puts it into the world of what we call systemic or relational theories of leadership. And that's really where the stuff is. I mean, you can increase your performance as an individual leader by about 5%, right? But if you can leverage that through others, you've got a 40 to 50% improvement in performance, if not significantly more. So that's why growth mindset needs to be seen in that context. Now, what's interesting, let's take you back to Amy Edmondson's research about psychological safety, because I want to talk about my work with this. But she found out is that when you look at surgical units in hospitals, she bumped into a funny bit of data, and that is that the teams that report the biggest number of errors are the most successful teams, measured in terms of patients dying, having scalpels left in their body, insurance claims, etc. Now that was a bit intriguing. So what she discovered was that psychological safety told you something about the likelihood of people wanting to speak up and share important critical data about what's going on in their work, right? And that's the foundation of her research and work. It's super, super important, because in change management, the reason why it often goes wrong after the kickoff with the balloons and the chocolates is we don't get any decent data. We don't know what's going on. And that's because we lose an appetite for the truth, and we have an increasing appetite for spin, right? So again, how is it that great teams report more? Because we are always working in organization with the conspiracy of silence. Now, sometimes the conspiracy of silence is because I just don't think it'll make a difference. So that's kind of like a soft version. The other version is if I speak up, somebody's going to kick my ass, right? So, so instead of speaking up, it ends up a situation where instead of speaking up, I stay quiet. What's also interesting about psychological safety research is that it's not enough by itself. We need challenge, daring of some sort. It's part of the mix. Now, it's spoken about a little bit in the book, but if you look at most of the scenarios that she discusses there, particularly one I find fascinating, which is about the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear reactor accident, it's not the one that explodes, it's the one that doesn't explode. That's a curious case. But the point here is that psychological safety is correlated with some really cool stuff, right? And I could go through the list, but I won't because it's really boring. But essentially, I call this the commitment premium, in the sense that when we have psychological safety and the challenge of growth mindset, we're able to get that extra discretionary effort that is really the goal that we're looking for. Because in today's world, when most employees who are loyal are going to get replaced by smart machines, they need to be showing initiative, right? Because otherwise there won't be a job for loyal people. And that's kind of the point that Gary Hamel made actually some time ago. You not only could then, when he wrote his book, The Future of Management, buy loyal people, today you can buy a bloody computer which will do something loyal. So reality, a lot about growth mindset, about psychological safety, is not people doing what you're expecting. It's people willing to challenge you, the status quo, and to speak up. That's what we're looking for. That's that human quality of rebelliousness, perhaps, which is what this is about. So safety drives trust, drives growth is the sort of central premise. And that's why my organization, speaking of Jack's point about purposeful change, is that I believe that my role in my company is making global organizations safe for great work. Because when we have that, we're able to then add growth mindset and make things happen. All right. What can I say about, I'm working on a book, as mentioned, from Safe2Great. It's been slightly impacted by COVID and many other things. But my point, one of the points I'd make when I work with organizations, and I've just started a number of sort of, getting ready for the end of COVID projects, reinvigorating organizations and cultures, etc. But my fundamental point is organizations are always busy, but they're often very busy at holding themselves back, right? And so growth mindset, when we start looking at collective mindsets or culture, is about enabling people. Because far too often we sort of assume that, individuals can do everything, like knowledge share across boundaries, collaborate with people spread across the world. It doesn't actually work that easily. The only way sometimes we can get people to do difficult, challenging, scary things is we create cultures which provide the support and mechanisms to make that happen. You have to approach it from a team or organizational perspective when we're talking about things that don't come naturally to humans, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. What's crucial, though, is that what we know about culture is that leaders define it, right? It's not in the walls. It isn't. It never has been. 50 to 70% of your culture is defined by individual leaders in your organization. And that's why the amount of cultural diversity that you will find in a company is often higher than the average between two different companies. And that's pretty significant, because everyone runs around saying, oh, I know what the culture is around here. And I say, you don't. I can reassure you of that, because whenever we've done any serious mapping of it, the amount of diversity within your organization is extremely high, right? But it's important. 30% of performance is determined by culture. Wow, ouch, right? So this matters. Now, basic operating system, back to what humans do naturally. It's not always particularly collaborative, right? I mean, it's collaborative in a wired for tribes kind of way, but most collaborations and groups are designed to be protective, to protect you against a known or unknown enemy. So that's not a very functional kind of collaboration in an organization. That's often why you have silos, right? We're local rather than global. We have a limited bandwidth. We're emotional, not rational, etc. And you've seen all of these kinds of things before. We play it safe rather than playing for great, okay? It's a bit like a game show, right? If you look into the research into game shows, people always go home before you become a millionaire, right? Why? Because humans just don't very rarely like taking risks. So we play it safe, right? Now, psychologically, safety looks like fight, flight, freeze. And some of you are probably familiar with that trichotomy of defense mechanisms. I call them safe mindsets. And I'm going to put some things on it because mindset fundamentally is like an anchor. I mean, a bit inspired by Immunity to Change. I know there's people on this call who know that book really well. And it's great. It inspired me to think about mindset like an anchor. It makes you safe, but holds you back, right? It provides a more or less artificial way of managing uncertainty that makes you sort of functional, but often what happens is as the world around you becomes more complex or there's more opportunities, you just can't take them. You're not going to hop in your balloon and fly away. So playing for great is unnatural at the individual level for the vast majority of people. So we have to attack it with the kind of positive peer pressure, the kind of organizational culture that would activate it. Because it's just not going to happen if you just say, oh, you just need to have a growth mindset. Forget it. People will always have a tendency when they meet risk or uncertainty or just a really shitty boss, excuse the French, go defensive on you, right? And the problem is that growth mindset is not comfort zone. Comfort zone is safe mindset. It's a discomfort zone, and it's staying in that mode, which is the hard part. Now, I have animals to describe that, and some years ago, as I presented this to the organization here, one is the hippo, the most toxic animal in Africa and also in your organization. Dominating, coercive type of leader and people, controlling. They have a fight reaction to uncertainty and change. They want to take control. On the other side, we have flight, complying. I call it a snail, right? People who go away when they are fighting with complexity, challenges, new people to meet, etc. And finally, we have the critical skeptical, the clam, who spends most of their early life finding a rock on which to glue their head to, which they then stay there for the rest of their life, right? Now, these are fairly dramatic pictures to describe fundamentally the kinds of things that happen in change projects. People will, unless we create a growth mindset, fall into the red, gray, and green forms, fight, freeze, or flight, right? That's what happens. So in change management, we're trying to get them into an exploratory commitment mode of grow, and that's what I want to talk about. Because when we're in the red zone, we're conflict and competition. When we're in the green, it's about boredom and contempt and so on. And in the gray zone, we get resistance. And this is something I measure on a daily basis at the leader level, team level, and organizational level. And this is the model I use to do that. This is a circumplex. It's common to a couple of other organizations, including Human Synergistics and the Leadership Circle, for example, use a circumplex to study leadership, team, organizational behavior. Mine is modified to work with the terms of growth mindset and psychological safety. And I have 4 areas to work with. So I want to use this to show you something really curious. Now, for 3 years, I've been measuring in 360s global leaders, right? And that is really interesting because we asked the question, how by, on average, you have 10 reporters per 360. So we ask all these people, how effective is the leader? And here are the correlations, ladies and gentlemen. So your alpha male bossy leadership is sort of, it has a minor negative influence on effectiveness. We know that. The thing is that alpha male leadership looks strong and we tend to just have these ridiculous unconscious biases, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But in reality, being nice, which is the snail, is the worst. And that's why I would say that being nice in an organization is the dirtiest 4-letter word in an organization. And interestingly too, in a moment, you'll see how negative niceness is on psychological safety, right? That's really curious. Now let's have a look at the clam too, concreting its head to something and minus 31. That's not a great correlation, but again, growth mindset, and you can see the other correlations here. It's massively different, right? Psychological safety, and people think that, oh yeah, I'm really nice and friendly and apologetic. That is just, it's not going to cut it. So unless you, as somebody who is very sort of empathetic and sensitive to other people's needs, if you don't develop the ability to be held accountable, set direction, you're actually creating fairly low levels of psychological safety. It would actually be better to be a hippo, to be honest. Not that I would ever recommend that. Now, the point is that all the safe styles, like whether we take the hippo or the snail, are fundamentally making a trade-off. A hippo believes that you can only be effective by being tough on task, and therefore I have to forget relationship. Snails the other way around. They'll say, okay, I need to be friendly, and therefore I have to compromise on setting agendas up. Growth mindset is the optimal combination of challenge and support at the same time. And this defies this long sort of schooling about strength-based leadership. Oh, you just have to be yourself. I say that's a really, really bad idea. Authenticity matters, but there are expectations about what great leadership looks like. And in just about for every person, it is about learning to leverage your strengths, absolutely, the good bits, right? And being able to learn to do new things, new habits, new ways. So if you're good at task, you learn to be good at developing relationships. If you're good at relationships, you learn to be good at task. If you don't do that, whatever the strength school says, it won't help you, right? Because it won't lead anywhere good, right? So I want to just talk briefly about great leadership. I think that the best example is Jacinda Ardern, right? We need more of her just about everywhere. Would be my argument. I love the fact that she said, I fundamentally challenge the idea that you cannot be compassionate and courageous. That is the quote of the year leadership-wise. And that's what growth mindset's about. It's doing both. It's moving beyond that I can only be one or the other. I can only be tough. I can only be friendly. She has both. It's awesome. There's a couple of other people here too that are capable of this too, but let's forget the men. They're boring anyway. Now, the point is about leadership in my work is it actually doesn't look like Superman. It looks a hell of a lot more like Clark Kent or Peter Parker. Now, I thought, what does Wonder Woman look like when, but then she's an Amazonian. So that didn't really work. So in essence, great leadership, growth mindset comes in packages that just aren't that flashy, right? And here's Margaret Hamilton, the famous woman who invented the term software design at NASA. And she challenged the astronauts to say to them, I think astronauts can make mistakes. And she invented the fail-safe system that saved the Apollo 11 as the thing was landing on the moon. Bloody brilliant. That's all I'm going to say. But great leadership is autonomy enhancing. It's about learning. It's purposeful, as we've just heard about. It's energized. It's supportive, clever. It's all those things. If you can only do one of them, you need to practice, right? And practice makes perfect. Let's have a look at some research into change management here, just to show you a little bit what I've discovered. I'm going to jump over a couple of slides. I'm just looking at the time, and I want to have some questions and stuff. Right, okay, picture of turtle and plastic, right? You're probably wondering what that's about. Unfortunately, this is the reality that one of my clients is currently facing. They make plastic, right? So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle. But they were doing a merger, and they did a big merger, and they invited me in to work with 18 of their top talented change managers across their organization. The organization is pretty big. It has about 45. The merger was between two companies, one about 10,000, 15,000, another 25. So this is a big deal, right? So I brought a change champion model, which is essentially the key point here is that it measures both positive drivers of change and negative ones. This is one I've developed that links into the growth culture assessment that I've got. So we're able to do two things: measure change management effectiveness, but also look at the culture that's going on. I call this the contagious change model. Now, putting all that aside, what we found out, I want to share with you, is that what were the best, teams, when I'm saying this is the project team responsible for bringing about a fairly substantial change. When I assessed them, we assessed the leader, and we assessed the people who were impacted by the change around, change effectiveness and growth mindset culture. Ta-da! And this is really, really interesting. And I haven't shared this one with anyone else. So this is the first time. So I hope it all makes some sense. But here is the best in class from that particular group of 18 projects, right, across the company. This was in South America, interestingly enough. And a very difficult transformation because it was actually the smaller company buying the bigger one in terms of footprint in this case, in this merger. Look at that. That's a pretty good number. Quite a lot of blue, which means growth mindset. It's got a little bit of red, but under that dotted line, which means that it's manageable. But we want to see more blue. We want to see more on the top end of the circumplex. When we looked at the corporate average, we see it much less blue, a lot more green. So we're seeing a more snail, passive organization, etc. If we see the worst in class project, okay, lots of gray, lots of green, lots of red. Now, what does that mean? It supports in a minute, because then we ask the question, how effective were they? How compelling, how courageous, how capable, how contagious was their projects? And what we saw was the blue benchmark was significantly better than average in terms of what we call positive drivers of change, but most importantly, considerably lower on average on all the negative drivers of change. Because the interesting thing when you measure both culture and project effectiveness, if your tool doesn't have negative measures in it, I can reassure you, you don't get very reliable data. Because the way people respond to negative questions is far more interesting in how they respond to socially acceptable positive ones. So this does both, right? And that's what scares the living daylights out of people when I present it. But the truth helps, right? At least I hope so. Now, I want to share with you, what was really interesting is when we do a 360 of how the project team's going with their team, with their impact, is what we found with the growth mindset team is there was much, much closer alignment between stakeholders about the culture and about how well the project was going. As soon as we saw a group that had like the worst case, we had a huge split in diversity and stakeholder impressions. So what we end up with some conclusions about what does growth mindset mean to a team in change management. Well, what's interesting is that they are far better at developing a comprehensive change management strategy and implementing it with credibility. So when we measure it, we can actually predict whether their change management strategy, whether they'll go through those, COTA steps or whatever we want to use in the right way. In my case, the 4C model. The other thing too is they accurately assess where they are. And that's got to do because they have better external relationships. Because remember, growth mindset's about how you relate to others, and it's about psychological safety. So if I do both those things, the quality of my data is just a lot better. Now, the other thing too is that because I'm generating psychological safety and growth mindset, the people who are impacted by the project are more constructive. We get what's called a constructive sense-making process. In other words, exploration rather than I'm going to run away and do something else. And finally, the teams themselves were simply more robust. There was less internal fighting, etc. So let me sort of sum up a little bit here. Psychological safety plus challenge equals growth mindset in reality. So you're probably asking the question, and I just did a bit of a teaser. What are the behaviors that actually create psychological safety in my research? These are correlation numbers, and here are the items. Accepts negative feedback, takes responsibility for negative emotions, treats people fairly when they fail and make mistakes, curious, inquisitive. All about feedback. And that becomes a pretty crucial thing. Ones that kill it, privately blames others for problems, unable to provide clear direction, talks down experts, what I call wet rags. Wet rags are the worst for psychological safety, and obviously people who are never willing to admit mistakes and blame others, etc. So let me get back to my first story about the shark. What did I actually learn? I need to demonstrate some learning on this, is that if you're diving in particularly a drift dive, right, when the current is about 4 kilometers per hour, have a flag, right? Secondly, get a whopping great big pink sausage, which is inflatable, so that if in doubt, you can blow it up and people can see you. And that's what I've dived with ever since. So that's what I learned. So let me just reiterate some key points. Growth mindset's about relating. Psychological safety is the key to creating great teams, but it's without growth mindset, we need challenge. Great leadership is not always what you think. In fact, it comes in some really, really humble, unusual packages. and we need to be better at surfacing them in our organizations. It's central to effective change, growth mindset, because we get that ability to do more change, right? Because often a lot of our change project ends up making it harder to make change in the future. We actually generate cynicism, failure, and bad experiences that became quite hard to shift later on. Think of how many of us as change managers meet an organization and say, oh, we tried this before and it was a complete, total cluster thing, disaster, right? That's quite common. Finally, change leaders with a growth mindset make things stick because they create those relational potential. Remember, as I said that. It's a combination of caring and then daring, which of course is central to it. And my final point, never drift dive without a flag, right? Otherwise you will probably die. So if you'd like to take a test on growth mindset, safe2great.com, pretty simple address, but I'm really curious for questions. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Skip, for a very inspirational presentation. I love your diving analogy. My experience was not a shark, it was just a mother seal with a baby pup very close by, and that did it for me. I swam off too, I have to admit. I was
surprises underwater are somewhat more surprising. There's just a different level of anxiety that doesn't help. Yep.
Exactly. So I love that analogy and the connection you made for psychological safety. So just in the spirit of time, because you've shared a lot, it would be great maybe if you could chat just that kind of the research website reference you made at the very end in the chat, so people have that. When is your book out? Can I just ask you that? When is your book going to be released?
Oh, you're really challenging me now. My editor and I are bashing our way through all the typos and the stupid ideas. So I think we're talking Q3 to be realistic. I have to admit, I had a small challenge, is that my wife and I had a baby. So, you can't do everything. You just can't do everything. And that's perhaps what growth mindset is too.
Absolutely, no, but good to know. For those of you interested in ordering your book, then basically look out for it after the summer, and they'll be able to get a copy of it. Skip, that's wonderful. I know you're going to hang around and be available for people. So a very, very big thank you from me for an inspirational presentation.